up on our YouTube channel at a later date after a little bit of editing. But don't worry, we have it set to only record those of us who are unmuted and speaking into the yellow boxes. So as long as you stay muted, you will not be picked up in the recording. But please feel free to use the chat throughout the evening for anything you want to share. And now I'm going to turn things over to David to welcome our Bookseller presenters.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. All the books that our booksellers are going to be discussing tonight can be found at the link I'm posting here in the chat. This is a link to the Notes from the Shire blog that you can also access from northshire.com. And you can see all the titles that everyone's going to talk about tonight. But first up, we have master bookseller from the Manchester, Vermont store, Alden Graves. Alden, please tell us what you have been reading lately and all that. We're excited.
Well, I thought I'd start off this evening with a book that's titled The Reason That I Wasn't at the Last Bookseller Event, and that is Snow. It is a mystery by John Banville. I'm going to hold these. I don't read a lot of mysteries, but I read Banville's last book, which was called Mrs. Osmond, which was a sequel to Henry James' Portrait of a Lady, and I liked it a lot. So I picked up this book, and it's a lot of fun. It is about Colonel Osborne and his kind of deteriorating estate and his deteriorating family. His wife wanders around the manor house at night like a graveyard ghost. His daughter's carrying on with the handyman, who is a very unpleasant character, and his son has decided to give up medical school and become a beachcomber. So the last thing Colonel Osborne needs is something else going on. And lo and behold, they find a dead priest in the library of the estate. And a dead priest anywhere is a pretty serious business, but in Ireland, it's even more so. And the hierarchy of the Catholic Church suddenly expresses an interest that the resolution of the crime not reflect too badly on them. And that is pretty much what Detective Inspector St. John Strafford has to face when he comes to the estate to try and solve the murder. It has a very Agatha Christie flavor to it. You have this deteriorating estate, these quirky characters. There's a raging snowstorm going on, and this is what the detective has to deal with. I hope that this character is somebody that maybe Banville plans to bring back at some point and make a series of detective novels using him, because he's a fascinating character. The next book I'd like to talk about is one of my favorite books, and I'm not holding these very well, I guess. It's called A Summons to Memphis, and it won the 1987 Pulitzer for fiction. It's one of my favorite books. It's by Peter Taylor, who really is more noted as a short story writer. He only wrote a few novels. I think maybe only 2 or 3 at the most. This one is about another kind of dysfunctional family, headed by a man by the name of George Carver, who is a prominent lawyer in Memphis. And his family seems to be falling apart. His wife passes away, and his 2 daughters kind of resign themselves to spinsterhood, which they're perfectly content with. And his son decides the only way he can escape what seems to be inevitable in Memphis is to go to Manhattan and establish another life for himself in the city, which he does. And then one night, he gets 2 phone calls, one from each sister, both telling him that he has to come back to Memphis as soon as possible because their 80-year-old father has fallen in love with a much younger school teacher. She's in her 50s, and he has to do something to throw a monkey wrench into the wedding plans. It's a wonderful novel about Southern manners, exposing the snobbery and the hypocrisy that is at the heart of most of it. It's a delightful book. It's not very long, and it's one of my favorite books. The next book I'd like to talk about it's much more recent, Leave the World Behind. The author's name is Ruman Alam. This is about a family that's fairly stable by contemporary novel standards anyways, who rent a house on Long Island, a very isolated house with their 2 teenage children. And they have a pleasant time, except for the fact that all of a sudden, all of their connection with the outside world ceases. The internet, they don't get any radio or television reception. The cell phones don't work, nothing. They're totally isolated, which causes a certain amount of anxiety, as you might expect. But then in the middle of the night, there's a knock on the door. And they're very apprehensive about opening the door in the middle of the night in this isolated area. But when they do, it is the African-American couple who own the house that they're renting. And they tell them that something has happened in Manhattan, and they got out of the city as quickly as they possibly could because they didn't know what was going to happen next. This book is entirely, it's all about what is going on in the best possible way. I mean, it's kind of like a mixture between Orwell and the Twilight Zone. You don't know what's going on, and neither do any of the people in the novel. There are huge herds of deer that suddenly appear, huge flocks of birds that suddenly appear, and you don't know what's going on. And I'm famous for giving things away to people here at the North Shire, and I'm not going to tell you what's going on, but it's a fascinating book. The next book I'd like to talk about is something I read very recently. It just came out, I think, this week. And it's called We Begin at the End. And it's by an author, I'm sorry, procedure here. It's by an author by the name of Chris Whitaker. It's about 3 friends. Walk is the name of one of them, Vincent and Star, two men and a woman. Throughout their teenage years, they were kind of misfits in the town where they grew up, but they were perfectly comfortable with that. When they got into their teens, into their 20s, Walt became the sheriff of the local town. Vincent was involved in an accident in which a child was killed, and it has affected his life negatively. He's gone to prison, and even though he's out of prison, he has never been the same person. And Star is murdered. And Vincent is accused of Star's murder. So it falls to Walk to try to prove that his friend, his lifelong friend, did not kill Star. And this is part mystery, and it's also part social drama. It takes place in a town that's being overtaken by tourists along the Pacific coast, with all the attendant trauma that causes on local people. The reason I really like this book is that the people are so fleshed out. A walk is what you would probably call the hero of the book, the most admirable character in the book. But he has a lot of things that are not very admirable about his personality. And by the same token, the villain was not Vincent. There's a villain, a genuine villain in the novel. He has some redeeming points. And I really appreciated that because so often in mysteries, especially, everything is black and white. This is, I hesitate to say it because we're only into March, but I think this is going to be my favorite book of 2021. My favorite book of 2020 was called Greenwood. And I absolutely love this book. It just came out in paperback. It is about the lives of two men. It spans the better part of an entire century. As boys, they were pulled out of a tremendous train wreck and brought up by a town who assumed the two of them were brothers, but they are not really brothers. And when they grow up, they go their separate ways. One of them becomes a tycoon in the lumber industry in Canada. This book is very concerned with the environment and the destruction that is taking place in forests, which seems to be a theme that runs through a lot of books lately. The other man becomes sort of a wanderer, rootless. And then something happens that brings the two of them back together with momentous effects on both of them. There is a slight soap opera-ish tendency every once in a while, but it just made it more readable for me. I love this book, and people who I've recommended it to have come back and said how much they really liked it. I'm going to have to set up my last book. I won't show it to you till I've done the setup. My aunt had her great-grandfather was a lawyer, a wealthy lawyer in Manhattan. That's probably redundant. Most lawyers in Manhattan, I'm sure, are wealthy. He owned a farm in Bennington, down in Bennington, a large farm, and he hired a man by the name of Charles Jones to run the farm. And in the spring of 1912, Mr. Colgate asked Mr. Jones if he could go to England to pick out a special breed of longhorn sheep to improve the stock on the farm in Bennington. And Mr. Jones was perfectly agreeable to that. And as a reward for a job well done, Mr. Colgate bought Mr. Jones a first-class ticket home on the Titanic. And my aunt must have told me that at a very impressionable age, because I have been fascinated with the Titanic for as long as I can remember, way before anybody knew who James Cameron was. This is the best book I've ever read about the Titanic. It's called The Ship of Dreams. It's by an author by the name of Gareth Russell. It tells the story through the eyes of 6 people on the ship, including the chief architect, and my favorite, with apologies to Margaret Brown and to Debbie Reynolds, my favorite character has always been the Countess of Roths, and hers is one of the stories that they tell in this book. She was a genteel English noblewoman who, in the lifeboat, tried to calm hysterical passengers. She manned the tiller for a while. She manned the oars for a while until they got to the rescue ship. But the reason that I like this book so much is that it incorporates a lot of information that they have been able to gather from discovering the wreck. Things like the fact that the ship broke into 3 pieces, not 2 pieces, like is generally assumed, even in Cameron's movie, which is amazingly accurate as far as what happened that night. I thought this book was just tremendous, and it also gives you a very human perspective on this tragedy. If I've got time, David, I'd like to mention 3 books that are coming in the near future.
I'll give you 1 minute, Alden.
1 minute. Okay. Ridgeline. It's coming in August. I'm sorry, it's coming in June. It's about the Betterment Massacre. It's very similar to The Killer Angels in that it incorporates a historical incident with a fiction in the sense that he delves into what people were thinking, and you can't do that in a historical. It is very, very much for people who are not upset with graphic violence. It's extremely, it's by the author of The Revenant. Damnation Spring, which is coming in August. It's about a woman who thinks that the local timber company's defoliant is causing birth defects in the area. And this book, which is coming at the end of September by Richard Powers, who wrote The Overstory, it is a tough book to get into, but once you get into, settle into what it's about, it is absolutely fascinating. And it's an intriguing book, also very concerned with the environment. That's all I've got, Stefan.
Thank you, Alden. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's been great to have you on, and now you can go. There's no snow. Get home safe.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Alden. Next up, we have from the Saratoga Springs store, Jules Wagner. Tell us what you have been reading.
Thank you. So lately I have been reading, well, I reread this book that came out in, I believe, 2019, right? Yeah, I think it came out in about 2019. I read it once and then I reread it. It is called Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. And it is a great nonfiction graphic novel, actually. And it's great because it not only just tells you the story of what it's like growing up transgender, but also shows you with some of its pictures. So I strongly believe that this book should be read by everyone, especially those in the transgender community, as I have personally never related and felt more understood by a book in my life, more than this one. But also just everything that you need to experience, put yourself in the shoes of those who struggle with this situation daily. This is the book to go to for that, just to get that perspective. And a lot of this is, I think, one of Maya's works. They've also written a picture book for children as well. I forget the name of it, is blanking on me at the moment. But yeah, it's basically what it's like growing up transgender and just finding who you are and realizing that society, that you don't exactly fit into society, but that's okay. It's okay not to fit in with the norms of society and the norms of what you're supposed to be, essentially. And you get to learn that as you go through the book, and it's just a very nice, useful, much needed guide to just kind of help give a just a different view of what it's like. So Genderqueer is one of the great books that I have read/reread recently. And then the next one that I am most of the way through right now, is a book that is coming out next week called Lost in the Neverwoods by Aidan Thomas. The last bookseller book chat that I was in, I mentioned Cemetery Boys, which had just came out by Aidan Thomas. Came out in September of 2020. It was his debut novel, and I'd absolutely loved that book. I loved the way that Aidan writes. So Lawson and Neverwoods looks like that. I don't have a physical copy of it, but that's what it looks like. And Lawson and Neverwoods is a retelling of Peter Pan in a young adult version in a modern day world. It's through while I've been reading it so far, I definitely get some mystery vibes from it. It is basically like a mystery Peter Pan, some pretty minor kind of creepy vibes too, like Wendy, the main character. Her two brothers have been missing for 5 years. She had been missing for 6 months. And she doesn't remember at all what had happened while she was missing. And she feels like it's all her fault that her brothers are still missing and no one can find them. And suddenly this boy, Peter, just literally drops into her life one day. And she's like, "Hey, who are you?" And he's like, "I'm Peter Pan." She's like, "What? Peter Pan's not real." So it's kind of very funny. It's comical, but mysterious. And just the way, like I said, that Aidan writes and narrates his stories, it's like he's describing a movie to you as it's playing out, which I think it's really cool. It makes everything very easy to imagine, to like bring pictures to your mind about. So that one is being released next Tuesday, and I'm very much looking forward to it. The next book, this one I also just finished, and I feel is a great read for the month of March, given that it is Women's History Month. It's a bit of an older one. However, this author does have a new book coming out this May, which I will mention what that one is in a moment. So this is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. I think I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. And so Red Queen is a part of a trilogy, and it has a strong main female character. It's about this girl named Mare Barrow, who her world is separated by blood. There are the silver blood people who have powers and can be dangerously lethal with some of their powers. And the powers range from all sorts of different things too. There's like powers that deal with metal, with being able to control metal. There's powers of course, fire, water, earth. There's powers to make you go invisible. Like, you think of it, this world has that power. And then there is the people with red blood who don't have powers, and so they are kind of under the dictatorship of essentially of the silver blood people. So this is a dystopian trilogy, like some YA trilogies, but it's very different from the rest of them in that it has more to it than a lot of YA dystopians, which I feel some of them I feel focus a little too heavily on like love triangles or love tropes in the story. In this one, that is not entirely the case. While there are love interests, in the end, it doesn't necessarily go to any of those roots, which I was kind of surprised by, and I actually found very pleasant. Um, and and what was one of my other notes? Oh, there's also a lot of foreshadowing in the book, which I very much like. I thought was very interesting because the foreshadowing wasn't like too blatantly obvious, but after like a few chapters, you kind of get the idea. So yeah, that Red Queen, I feel would be super good for Women's History Month. And I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of this trilogy as well. The next book that I have also read recently is Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. This one also came out this past September. And I found it very resourceful. I thought it was similar to a book that I mentioned in the last book chat that I was in October, which was The Invisible Orientation, an introduction to asexuality by Julie Sandra Decker, which this book does refer to that one. It does reference it. But this book, I feel, had a lot more diverse material in it compared to The Invisible Orientation, because it talked about what it's like being asexual from all different walks of life, from both white people and Black people, people of color, and also from people that have disabilities, and just all around the world. Honestly, it even got some perspectives from other countries, which I thought was very interesting, very amazing. And so I feel this one would also be a very good educational source that could be used in like health classes and so forth as well, just to kind of make asexuality make people more aware of what it is, and that there are just many different ways of being asexual as well. So that is Asexual or Ace by Angela Chen. Then the next one, which I have also been reading, is Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera, which just had a sequel released, which is why I just picked it up, because the sequel looks even cooler, called Infinity Reaper, that just came out, actually, no, not today, last Tuesday. And Infinity Sun is about two twin brothers with very different mindsets in a world that is filled with, again, people with powers and that are like phoenixes, which is why it has like a phoenix on the front cover. And also dragons existed in this world at one point. And so far, it's been very unique seeing the two brothers' different perspectives, because it tells a story from both perspectives. It tells it from both Emil, one of the twins, and then also from the other twin, Brighton, who is a lot brasher than Emil. Emil is very much afraid of everything, doesn't want to get caught up in danger, tries to avoid being in the spotlight, while Brighton is very much all about action, all about going and seeing what's happening out there and catching it on film for his YouTube channel. which I thought was pretty cool that that even social media and like Instagram has talked about in this and YouTube has talked about in this, which I thought was pretty cool, how it's basically like a modern day alternate universe. So this one I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it plays out, and also hearing what the sequel is all about, or reading what the sequel is all about. I read from the author's Twitter that the last sentence of Infinity Son is the first sentence of Infinity Reaper, but actually told from a different perspective. So I'm like, ooh, that's pretty cool. I like that. So I think it's really cool how authors will kind of give little snippets like that away, or like bring them to light on their social medias. So that is Infinity Son and Infinity Reaper. And then also, oh, I forgot to mention about Red Queen. I think I might have forgotten to mention this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Victoria Aveyard does have a book coming out in May called Realmbreaker, which I will be reading very soon. And I keep hearing a lot of hype about it, so I wanted to give that one a shout out as well. And then the last book that I'm just going to give a quick shout out to, and is next up on my to read list after I get through Lawson and Neverwoods and Infinity Son, is the Shadow and Bone book by Leigh Bardugo. It looks very enticing. I love the cover. I love the shades of blue and gold that it uses. And it's kind of similar to Red Queen, it looks like, in that in Red Queen, there's also war happening, and Mare was the only one that could possibly bring the war to an end when actually something else happens. Well, and in Shadow and Bone, there is also a war happening between countries, and it looks like the main character, Alina Starkov, is sent to the front lines of the war, just like how Mare thought that she was going to be sent to the front lines of the war, only to discover that that she has powers that she didn't know that she had, just like Mare found out in Red Queen. So obviously a bit of a trend there in my reading lately with powers and just in strong female characters, because who doesn't like a good strong female character during Women's History Month, or anytime really. So this also has a Netflix series coming out next month, which is another reason why I wanted to give it a quick shout out. It's coming out April 23rd, and I will definitely be binging that after reading the book. So yeah, I hope I didn't go over time or anything. Okay, so yeah, those are some of the books I've been reading lately, and I will keep everyone updated with my reviews on the Northshire website.
Thanks so much, Jules. That was great. All right, next up, we have from the Manchester, Vermont store, Digby Baker Porozinski. Digby, take us away.
Hello, everyone. If you haven't met me, my name is Digby. I work at the Manchester store, and I read a good balance of fiction and nonfiction. However, over the last few months, I would say it's leaned closer to nonfiction. So that's going to be a lot of tonight. First off, the only new fiction title on my list, the rest are mostly nonfiction, The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett. If you don't know Ken Follett, he's written a lot of books, and originally it was thrillers, but now he's kind of more into historical epics. The Evening and the Morning is the latest in the Kingbridge series, specifically a prequel to Pillars of the Earth. Fans of Fullette will recognize his signature style in the new book, comprehensive research, atmospheric world building, as well as intelligent, sympathetic, and outright devious characters. It takes place during the Viking invasions of England, so naturally, since it is Ken Follett, you will feel like you're standing on the shore watching the ships come in. Really, really good read. And every time I read one of his chapters, I feel like I learn something new. And that's something exciting to get from an author in historical fiction. Up next, I've got The Age of Wood by Roland Dinos. The Age of Wood is a fascinating examination of the chronically understated role of wood as a material in shaping human history. The book takes us from the primitive tools of our ancient ancestors to the great wooden ships and edifices of empires around the world, to the modern ramifications of deforestation and climate change today. It has elements in it not only of biology and history, as one would expect from a book about wood, but also politics and physiology and chemistry and anthropology as well. Really well suited for fans of Jared Diamond or Yuval Noah Harari, and just an excellent kind of niche history book. Most recently, I read The Mission by David Brown, and I got to apologize because I do not have the trademark stack of books here to show you the covers of, but they're posting links, so you'll be able to see them all if you follow along in the chat. As I was saying, The Mission by David Brown is hands down the most joyous, entertaining, unique science book I've had the pleasure of reading in the last several years. It was absolutely spectacular and like nothing I've read before. The Mission chronicles the Herculean efforts of NASA's JPL laboratory, that's the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, to design and launch a probe to Europa, Jupiter's icy moon, in search of life. Their efforts took well over a decade as they grappled with the vast chasm of space, a sea of radiation around Jupiter, and a jungle of red tape here on Earth, as well as budget restrictions, which is kind of something that you associate with NASA once you've read this book. It is at once an underdog story, a collective biography of those involved, and a celebration of human ingenuity. Unlike anything I've ever read before, The Mission by David Brown. I'd recommend you pick it up. A moment ago, when I was talking about The Age of Wood, I also touched on Yuval Noah Harari, who is one of my favorite history authors. He wrote a book called Sapiens, which was widely held as one of the most groundbreaking and accessible books on human history, and it's also one of my personal favorites. And a couple months ago, he came out with Sapiens, A Graphic History, The Birth of Humankind, which I was deeply suspicious of when I first saw it on the shelf. I was surprised that anyone would try to adapt it into a graphic novel because the concepts are so arcane and the content is so serious, but I was very wrong. The colorful and eye-catching format of the graphic novel allows us to jump from the prehistoric savannah to the French Revolution in the span of a page or even a panel. And it can help break down complicated concepts like legal fiction, genetic and cultural adaptation, and social stratification. Having a little imagery is actually really helpful for stuff like that. So the graphic novel is perfect for fans of the original series, science lovers young and old, and for anyone else who might stumble onto it like I did. And since I'm here, I'll also take this moment to highly recommend the original book, Sapiens, which is a great take on world history, as well as one of the ones that followed it, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which is an invaluable resource for those who want to understand the global movements of today. Those probably won't be in the chat because I didn't say I'd be mentioning them, but Sapiens and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century alongside the graphic novel. Changing gears a little bit, the next book I have here is Creativity by John Cleese, the Monty Python guy. You probably know him from. I got this one as a gift for my older brother for Christmas, and as suggested by the subtitle on the book, it is a short and cheerful guide to creativity. And as it came from one of the creators of Monty Python, I was surprised to find how useful it was in terms of content and how serious the research that went into it was. Every now and then, the trademark wit of John Cleese will shine through, but that's not the centerpiece of this particular book. It's basically a half-hour seminar on getting to a place of creative productivity and staying there. It's well worth the read, and it's a nice gift. The same brother, lucky guy, also got this next one for Christmas, which was Heroes Feast, the official Dungeons and Dragons cookbook. We love D&D in my family, the cooperation, the storytelling, the arguments, and the inevitable snacks. This new book is a worthy addition to D&D's extensive canon. It's as full of lore and wonder as it is of recipes, and the recipes are no joke. Several hundred pages with cuisines representing the various in-game races and classes. It's as fun to look at as it is to cook from because it's just got so many beautiful illustrations and pictures. And also, if you're not familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, what are you doing? What are your evening plans? It's a pandemic. You're not doing anything. Go play Dungeons and Dragons. We have all the books at Northshire. It's an excellent little pastime. It engages your creativity. It's such a fun. So Heroes Feast, the cookbook, but also kind of everything else. It's just great. All right, changing gears again, we're going back to history. First Principles by Thomas Ricks. This is a more specific history book than those I'm used to reading. First Principles is a deep and thoughtful exploration of the educational backgrounds of 4 founding fathers: Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Adams. The depth of Thomas Ricks' research is stunning, providing details I wouldn't have dreamed were available. Stuff like what quotes the founding fathers had written in their diaries as teenagers to kind of gather who they were learning from at the time. In particular, what I appreciated from this book is how Ricks doesn't worship America's founding fathers as infallible heroes, but recognizes them for the flawed humans they were. It's definitely a great read for American history buffs. That's First Principles by Thomas Ricks. Before we wrap up here, I'm going to throw it back 700 years, roughly, to the rolling hills of Tuscany in 13th century Italy. The Black Death is raging through the cities, and young people flee to the countryside to wait out the pandemic in social isolation. If you've paid any attention to the last year, some of that will probably sound familiar. Boccaccio's Decameron is a collection of 100 stories, each told by one of the charismatic young narrators staying at the country house in the fictional frame narrative. Boccaccio was remarkably ahead of his time. Many of the stories have an irreverent hilarity that holds up almost a millennium later, as they poke fun at people in power and touch on timeless human instincts. It's hard to imagine a more relevant time for a book about people staying safe during a pandemic, but I hope its relevance will wane soon. It's a thick read, and it's from the 13th century, so it's a little old, but really it's fantastic. It's so unique, and I just loved it. So the Decameron, there will never be a better time in your life to read it. And lastly on my list, I'm still working on this one, and it doesn't come out till April, so I've got some time. It is called A Brief History of the Earth by Andrew Knoll. This is the history of the planet from the Big Bang to today, primarily through the eyes of a geologist, although Knoll's expertise covers a lot of other fields. The book follows how atoms are formed from subatomic particles, how dust formed from atoms, how stars and planets formed from dust, and how our planet came to host life. It's a quick read, but not a particularly easy one, and it'll be great for anyone who wants to better understand how the little pieces of our planet fit together and what our position on the Earth is. That's it for me. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much, Digby. That was fantastic. I was glad to hear that you recommended the Decameron too. I can't remember if is it Sir Separello in the first story of the first day, the one who's just such a terrible person, or Sir Caparello.
There's 100 stories. I did not commit their names to memory.
Well, anyway, it's just one of the best stories about this horrible person who is dying, and then they decide.
I think he's mistaken for a saint, and he's like, "Yes, I'm that one." Yeah,
like the innkeepers or something have to get rid of him, and they say, "Oh, this is the Gusta," and he has this great confession that's like once he took the Lord's name in vain, or something like that. It's just full of great things.
Go read the Decameron, people.
Yeah, the great stuff. We've got time for just one more recommendation, and my great good friend Rachel has a recommendation of a book I believe that just came out today. Rachel, take us over.
Yes. Though also chiming in to say, read the Decameron. I read it in an otherwise very boring class in college, and I remember what we were reading otherwise that semester was so dull. And then we got to the Decameron, and I was like, whoa, this is good stuff. So yes, it is amazing. But in a very different vein, this is not in the blog post, but I will throw a link in the chat quickly, and we will add it to the blog post because we weren't sure if we would get time for me to do this. But this is Half Your Age, Eve Brown, which just came out today. It's by Talia Hibbert. It is the third book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, but they can be read in any order. These are fluffy, fun romances set in the UK. In this one, Eve Brown is a hot mess. She probably has undiagnosed ADHD and has just struggled to get her life together. Her parents are at their wits' end. She keeps starting businesses that fail, having ideas that go wrong, always quite hilariously. And she basically runs off from home rather than disappoint her parents, and quite accidentally gets a job as a breakfast cook at a bed and breakfast with a very, very grumpy owner, and winds up moving in and really discovering herself as she's falling in love. And so it's a romance, it's a happy story, but it's also very much a story of self-discovery. It's sort of great escapist fiction. A lot of us at the North Shire have been really enjoying this trilogy as it comes out, and this new one as it came out today. So Up Your Age, Eve Brown is a fun read if you're looking for a happy distraction at the moment. And I do think that is all the book recommendations we have for today. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Digby, Jules, and from afar, Alden, who I think has left us already. Thank you, audience, for being here. It's lovely to see all of you again. And hopefully we'll see you at more North Shire Live events. We have a publisher sales rep recommendation night coming up in a couple weeks. And we'll be back next month to do another of the bookseller evenings. So hopefully we'll see you all again soon.